Last night, the federal leaders debated for the second time in French, primarily, of course, for a Quebec audience. La Belle Province is, of course, always critical for federal politics, but for the rest of Canada, the issues, the players, and the motivations of voters are rarely well known. Here to help remedy that just a bit, we welcome in Montreal, Quebec, Danielle Beland, director of the McGill Institute for the Study of Canada, and in Kingston, Ontario, Stéphanie Chouinard, who teaches political science at the Royal Military College and Queen's University. And it's good to have both of you on TVO tonight. Let's just start with a very simple question. Stephanie, who did the best in last night's debate, in your view?
I thought the leader who was able to explain the best his policies was Mr. Trudeau last night. I thought he was remarkable in how in-depth he knew his own policies, especially compared with Mr. O'Toole, who's obviously a little bit less nimble in French, but often came back to, we have a plan for that, and we have a plan for that, and was less so able to explain to the viewers what that plan actually was.
Danielle, your view?
Yes, I agree. And I think if you read the newspapers, the Francophone newspapers in Quebec this morning, this is the general impression, I think, overall, that the Prime Minister did well. And there was this moment, I think, probably the very intense, most intense moment of the debate where the Prime Minister really criticized Yves-François Blanchet's claim that he has the monopoly of, speaking for Quebecers. And this was a very strong moment for Justin Trudeau in the debate. A debate that was, I must say, a bit fragmented and not always that fascinating. But that's, these debates are uneven. In general.
That's a nice way of saying the cast of Ben-Hur was involved in last night's debate. They had, anyway, if you didn't see it, lots of different questioners coming on during the course of things. The 11-year-old kid I thought was pretty good. That was very interesting. But Stephanie, let me follow up with this. There was that moment where Mr. Trudeau tried to tell Mr. Blanchet, I'm a Quebecer, and don't you tell me what a Quebecer's all about. I can be a Quebecer and a proud Canadian all at the same time. I'm sure an English audience would love to hear that. How do you think that plays in Quebec itself?
I think in Quebec that was a very strong moment, and I was not so surprised to see Mr. Trudeau come at Mr. Blanchet for this, because one of Mr. Blanchet's lines throughout this election was the Bloc Québécois is really the only way to make sure that Quebec's voices are heard in Parliament. And Mr. Trudeau very rightly pointed that there were 11 members of his cabinet that are actually members of Parliament for Quebec. And so he was trying to make the point that any political party in Parliament can represent Quebecers. There are 78 seats in the House of Commons that are from Quebec, and it is up to Quebecers to decide what color these seats are going to be.
Daniel, some of us are old enough to remember the fact that John Diefenbaker won, I think, 58 seats in Quebec, not being able to speak a word of French beyond bonjour and au revoir. Aaron O'Toole's French is certainly way better than John Diefenbaker's. Is it good enough for a Quebec audience that cares about how well a Conservative leader can speak French?
I think his level of French is adequate. I don't think it's the quality of French that's the problem in and of itself. But I think it's that he doesn't say that much. So he repeats the same talking points over and over again. And I think Yves-François Blanchet laughed at him, especially during the TVA face-to-face last week, that he was always repeating that he had a plan, but didn't say that much beyond that. And I think that might be related to the fact that he's not so comfortable debating in French, so he repeats talking points, and that makes him look a bit, I would say, on the neutral side, like not really that involved. And you can say, well, it's prime ministerial to look calm, but sometimes you need a bit of fire in your belly, and you need to show that you're passionate about the issues. And I don't think it was a great debate for Erin O'Toole last night.
It's interesting, Stephanie, of Trudeau, Singh, the Green leader, Annamie Paul, and Aaron O'Toole, only one of them is born in Quebec, and it's O'Toole. How's his French? He's born in Montreal, and he likes to remind people during the Quebec debates, I'm happy to be back in the city of my birth. How is his French in your view?
I think Francophone voters are very happy with this election because it's the first time in at least my life that we have all of the leaders of the main federal parties who are fluent in French. And we're not, as Francophones, listening to the French debates and trying to decipher what they're saying, because we actually understand what they're saying. And as Danielle was saying, the problem is that some of them were not saying much. Some of the tones last night were, I think, adequate for a Quebec audience, but we were expecting more. This was the second debate in French. We were looking for a little bit more policy substance, a little bit more fire. Again, like Danielle said, a little bit of passion in this debate, and it only really came up in the second half of the debate, I think. But more so, I think for Mr. O'Toole, the problem was not the fluency of his French, is that the question for him has changed since the beginning of the campaign. He's not the underdog anymore. As of last week, he was leading. And so people are looking at him and they're asking, does he have the fabric of a prime minister? And last night, he did not show that.
Daniel, let me ask you about another party leader born and raised in the province of Quebec who was not there last night. Maxime Bernier was not invited last night. What do you think the viewers missed by not having the leader of the People's Party there?
Well, I think that it's interesting that Bernier, of course, is. I think the fact that he's not there, I'm not sure that it's necessarily bad for him, because he can then say that I'm excluded by mainstream politics, and he's a populist leader, so saying that the elites are excluding him is actually part of his rhetoric, right? So not being at the table. Then he can say, well, I'm a victim of these, the mainstream media and the elite, and so he can surf on that populist wave. But still, I think that it's important to understand what's happening with the People's Party, that they are ahead of the Green Party right now in the polls. And we'll see if Maxime Bernier can retake his seat in Beauce, for example. If the People's Party can elect just even one MP, they will have a presence in the House of Commons. And I think that could be a game changer for them. And this discourse, populist right-wing discourse that is now closely tied to anti-vax or anti-mask protest, that this discourse has quite a few takers in this country, as we can see looking at polling numbers. So it's important to, I think, not neglect the People's Party, especially because they could hurt the Conservatives. Because if they take votes away from a party, it would be primarily from the Conservatives, perhaps in Quebec a bit from the Bloc, but certainly not from the NDP, the Liberals, or the Green Party on average.
Let me follow up with you, Stephanie, on that, in as much as when the deadline was set, the People's Party was only polling at 2%. They didn't have any seats in the House, and therefore they were rendered ineligible to participate in both last night's debate and tonight's debate. However, now they're at 11% in some polls in Ontario and 11% in at least one poll in Quebec. What influence do you think they can have in this campaign at this juncture?
Yeah, unfortunately for the PPC, the rules were set before the election, and they needed to hit that 4% in the polls 5 days after the election was called, so on August 20th, and so that's why really they were disqualified. But I think to Danielle's point, I think it's true that Mr. O'Toole was probably happy, in fact, that Mr. Bernier was not on the stage last night, because there is a chance that he can split the vote on a number of issues. Not only is the PPC the new home of the anti-mask, anti-vax population, but we also need to remember that Maxime Bernier is a libertarian. And so when we're talking about, for example, the possession of firearms, his position is very clear. And we've seen Erin O'Toole flip-flop on this issue in the past week. The other issue that we're seeing in the polls, though, is that the rise in percentage of the PPC does not only come from people who were going to vote Conservative. It seems like we have a little bit of an undeciding vote base coming to the PPC this time around, or people who may have decided to vote for the PPC who otherwise wouldn't have voted. So we have a bit of a Brexit kind of situation here where we have new voters that are showing up in the polls that don't appear to be disaffected Conservatives.
Well, let's see how that might affect the state of play. And in doing so, I'm going to ask our director, Sheldon Osmond, to bring up a graphic here showing what the seat count was of the Quebec seats in the House of Commons before Parliament was dissolved. The Liberals had the most number of seats in Quebec at 35, Le Bloc Québécois close on their heels at 32. The Conservatives, yes, had 10 seats in the province of Quebec, and the NDP, despite the orange wave of a few elections ago, were down to 1. Now, I guess one of the things that I'm interested in here, Danielle, is that before last night's debate, polls were picking up a bit of a surge to the Conservatives at the expense of the Bloc. And I wouldn't necessarily have thought that the same voter could be attracted to both of those parties. What's the common element between the Conservatives and the Bloc that would allow a voter to say, I'm not as interested in the Bloc, and therefore I may give the Conservatives my vote this time? What's going on?
I think the key issue here is the vision of federalism, a more decentralizing vision. Erin O'Toole mentions François Legault regularly on the campaign trail, and it was certainly the case also in this in the first of the two official debates, so last night. I think that he has courted Quebecers, Quebec nationalists, people who are likely to support François Legault at the provincial level. And so I think that in terms of Francophone voters living outside of Montreal, both the Bloc and the Conservatives are really targeting the same audience, basically. And so that's why Erin O'Toole talks a lot about François Legault, because he's a very popular premier. It's not like Doug Ford or even worse, Jason Kenney, worse in terms of what has happened to them since the beginning of the pandemic, who have failed in the polls. François Legault remains very popular in Quebec, and both the Conservatives and the Bloc are really focusing on CAQ voters, people who vote for CAQ at the provincial level, and who are often nationalists, but they are not necessarily sovereignist, and they want to support a party that will favor a decentralization of the federal system. And that's what both the Conservatives and the Bloc are talking about. Of course, the rhetoric is different, but in the end, I think they have something strong in common in terms of a vision of federalism where the provinces, for example, on healthcare, will get more money from Ottawa without any strings attached, something that the Liberals and the NDP are opposed, or at least are not that sympathetic to.
Stephanie, do you have a sense that if Premier Legault, who I think polls show is the most popular premier in the country today, if he had his druthers, how would he like to see the seat count emerge after next Monday the 20th election?
So at the onset of the election, Mr. Legault made no secret that he was hoping for a Conservative minority in Ottawa, with probably a strong Bloc presence, if only for the fact that the Bloc, since 2019, has turned itself into François Legault's megaphone in Ottawa, essentially. They're very much riding on the coattails of the CAQ, as Danielle just mentioned. However, if we were to ask Mr. Legault this question today, I'm not sure he would have the same answer, especially in light of the fact that we finally got the costing for the Conservative platform at the 11th hour last night before the French debate. And what we know now is that Quebec would lose out lots on the childcare front if the Conservatives were in power. The Liberal government has signed an agreement to transfer $6 billion for childcare, and obviously the Quebec government has pledged to spend it in a number of ways within the childcare program that already exists in Quebec, unlike in other provinces. And the Conservative platform, it is now clear, would bring in a lot less money to the provincial government. So it is no coincidence, I think, that Mr. Blanchet was attacking Mr. O'Toole both last week in the TVA debate and last night on that specific part of the Conservative platform.
Well, Danielle, one thing I think we've all noticed in English Canada is that none of the federal leaders seems particularly interested in taking on, for example, Bill 21, no head coverings, barring of religious symbols and so on, if you want to work in the public service. Does that suggest that all of these leaders are so concerned about starting some kind of culture war between English and French Canada that they are essentially, they're just leaving that issue alone and no one's going near it?
Yes, I think that it's considered as a toxic issue in Quebec among Francophone voters to criticize Bill 21. And you know what happened to Justin Trudeau back in 2019 when François Legault criticized him for his position on Bill 21. That was actually really good for the Bloc. And I think if François Blanchet is really aligned himself with François Legault. He started in 2019 and he has been done that ever since. And I think that people don't want to mess with François Legault. So I think because François Legault is defending Bill 21 and is basically told federal leaders, you should not get involved in that file, that the party leaders have obliged because François Legault is so popular in Quebec. So in the end, it's about François Legault and the fact that he is so popular that the party leaders are afraid that Legault could turn against them publicly in a strong way, which will actually hurt them in the polls.
You know, Stephanie, I remember many elections ago, somebody once told me, a candidate for the Liberals once told me, if Quebec separated, would anybody really notice? And I wonder whether you think that, Bill 21 is an example of the fact that French and English are maybe two solitudes today, more entrenched in their own camps, maybe more than ever before. I don't know. You tell me.
Well, if Quebec were to separate, I can tell you that 1 million francophones outside Quebec would definitely notice because it would probably mean some significant changes for the respect of French in the rest of Canada. So, but to your question, I don't think we're at a point today where Quebec and Canadians are that far apart on several issues, despite the fact that there is a strong nationalist stance. Sovereignty today is actually quite an unpopular idea. It's quite striking to me that for the past two elections, the Bloc Québécois has made very little, if any, mention of sovereignty or of independence. It is an idea that seems like it's not on the radar anymore, and it's particularly unpopular among young Québécois populations. So I don't think we're at a breaking point by any stretch of the term here.
Okay, Daniel, let me ask the question to you this way. You work for a group called the McGill Institute for the Study of Canada. So I want to ask you about what your understanding in 2021 of Canada is. Are we still a country seen by the majority of people as a country of two founding peoples?
Well, this narrative of two founding peoples is being challenged by Indigenous peoples, for example. And so I think there is a debate about that going on in this country. We didn't talk that much about Indigenous peoples last night. I hope that this will be different, of course, in the English language debate. I think that Stéphanie is right. Of course, support for sovereignty in Quebec is quite low right now, especially among younger people. But there is still this idea of two solitudes. A lot of Quebecers don't know that much about what's happening in other parts of the country, like in Alberta, for example. When I live in Calgary, I had a journalist from La Presse who visited me, and she knew nothing about the National Energy Program, for example, which is a pretty big thing for people in Alberta. So I think, and people outside of Quebec, maybe it's not as much the case in Ontario because we are neighbors, but when I live in Saskatchewan or Alberta, many people had never been to Quebec and had a pretty limited understanding of what the province is beyond things like Poutine and René Lévesque and things like that. So I think it's a big country. It's a fragmented country in many ways. And what we do at our institute is to try to actually help people from different regions of the country understand what's happening in other provinces. And that's part of an important dialogue that we need to have.
Stephanie, last word to you on that. Are we still a country of two founding nations?
I think despite the fact that the Conservatives have been playing this rhetoric since Erin O'Toole has become leader, clearly in a way to try to seduce the Quebec nationalist vote, the idea of two founding peoples it's showing its age at this point. It is quite important for a vast part of the Canadian electorate today to give Indigenous peoples a bigger space and to see within our institutions how we can bring them in, and also to see how our institutions need to adapt to Indigenous peoples' viewpoints. I think two founding peoples is not really the way that we should think about our country in 2021.
Très intéressant. Stéphanie Chouinard, Queen's University and RMC, Danielle Beland, McGill Institute for the Study of Canada. Un grand plaisir to have both of you here à TVO ce soir. Bonne chance.
Merci.
Merci.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.